Hello everyone and welcome to Ventura Valley. I'm here with Matthew Salenger of coLAB Studio. How are you doing today, Matthew?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well too. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah. I want to begin by just asking you, may you please tell me a little bit about coLAB Studio and how it got started?
Yeah, the way that Maria and I came together was kind of an interesting story in that I was working for a company called Jones Studios, an architecture firm, and Maria was working for a different office. And my office that I was working for, Jones Studio, they were looking for people that could come and moonlight in the evening to help with a deadline that we had with a project. And so Maria came to Jones Studio nights, and within a month we were dating, and then we both were looking for graduate schools to go to at that stage in our lives. And we both applied to a bunch of different schools, and we both ended up getting accepted to two different schools in London. And so we flew from Arizona to London and lived there for 2 years. Maria was taking a master's degree in fine arts and sculpture, and I was doing a equivalency of master's degree from the Architectural Association of London. Both of the schools were really good, and we got a lot out of that. And when we were about to graduate, Maria suggested that we start going after public art opportunities back in Arizona so that we would have some potential work and start designing things on our own when we come back. And so we applied to the first public art project that we ever applied to in 1999. And it was about a month and a half, 2 months before we got back to Arizona. And we actually got shortlisted for the project, and we were interviewed via phone. We didn't get the job, but what was interesting is that project that we submitted ended up coming to fruition 15 years later, I think, in Phoenix, which was really neat. But so Maria and I came back to Arizona. We went back to work for Jones Studio, and we started applying for a lot of public art projects. And if you know, there were some times where people wanted us to look at doing something architectural for them, and so we just started working that way and moonlighting within Jones Studio, which thankfully the two partners, the Jones boys, Eddie and Neil, actually were okay with people moonlighting and thought it was really good for what we would learn and we could bring back to the office. So we did that for a few years, and in 2004 we founded coLAB Studio as an actual LLC practice. And then in 2007, at the end of 2006, I left Jones Studio and just started running coLAB Studio full time. And Maria is still really a part-time person in coLAB Studio, but we do all of our projects together in one way or another still.
I see. Why Arizona? Why did you choose to do coLAB Studio here in Arizona?
Yeah, that's a good question. We knew that in 1999, when we graduated from grad school, what I'll call grad school, for me too, that Arizona had, one of the lowest costs of living anywhere in the country. We had a lot of connections here. We had a lot of friends. We had a job to come back to that was with a really good office in Jones Studio, that we knew that we would enjoy the work that was going on there. And we also knew that because the low cost of living in Arizona, we would potentially be able to afford a house at some point and then start our own kind of practice based on whatever that house was going to be. And where we're sitting now was the house that we bought at the end of 2000 for very little money at the time, and just kept changing it and changing our minds about what we wanted. And I think the version that we have now is kind of the fourth iteration.
I see.
So that was the basis of coLAB Studio, and how we got to work together and why we wanted to come back to Arizona. We had a lot of good friends and people that were doing really great things here. And we felt like we could make a bigger mark here than we could in London or New York or San Francisco.
Got it. How many people make up coLAB Studio?
There are really just two of us that are the core of coLAB Studio. The way that we set up our practice is not in a typical way. What we did is we started a network of other professionals that we work together and bring into projects when we need them. And so we are very collaborative in that way, which is partially where coLAB Studio's name comes from, although it also is coLAB, meaning two labs, one for art, one for architecture, because we practice both. And so we have about 20 people total that we call on, depending on the project. So it keeps our overhead low, and the people that work with us get paid, very well, because we don't have to constantly pay them when their projects are there. They get paid really well. They have their own companies and everything. So the financial standpoint of it works out really well, and our collaborations are extremely friendly and copacetic, and everything seems to work out really well that way.
I see. What does a typical workday at coLAB Studio look like?
There's not a lot of typical workdays in a sense. We always have had multiple projects at the same time. We've almost never had, just one project. I don't think we've ever had 0 projects. The way that what we deal with in a regular day, let's say, are a lot of managing projects and people, about what's going on, what do we need to do next, what's completed, what are the main goals of something that we may be applying for, what are we really trying to do with this project, and how can we communicate it to the clients in a way that we can get the job. I mean, so it's a completely continuous flow of projects at different levels, and just making sure that everything is completed as these projects are going along and communicating with people. Most of the job is honestly communicating with people. I think designing is less than 10% of our time, unfortunately. But the idea that we're designing for other people or places, let's say, as well, and in public art as well, those things are paramount. And so having conversations with those people and understanding the people and the places and everything is really the most important aspect of getting a project right anyway. So those kinds of communications are perfectly fine for us. And yeah, we may be driving for meetings, we may be here, we may be having meetings here, we may be drawing in sketchbooks, we may be drawing in the computer. It really runs the gamut. And a lot of writing. I do a lot of writing about things, sort of journaling, trying to figure out, how to approach projects or problems or instances of what's happening around us at the time.
I also want to get to know a little bit more about you. Can you tell me about your own personal background with art and architecture?
Yeah, so when I was very young, my parents moved to the island of Maui when I was 3. And they moved there from New York, where my dad was a physician, and he saw a job opening on the island of Maui, and the family moved there. And the house that they ended up, that we all ended up living in, was a house by a really famous architect that was around in Hawaii during the turn of the last century. So in the early 1900s, he was still practicing. And the house was that we lived in was amazing. It was a Chinese courtyard style house. He was really influenced by both the indigenous Hawaiian culture, but also Asian culture and architecture. So the house was more or less a complete square where there was a courtyard in the middle of the house, and the house was on 3 sides of the courtyard with a wall enclosing the 4th one. And none of the rooms connected on the interior. You had to walk out to a central walkway to move around the landscape to get to another space. And that had always stuck with me, always. And I remember when I was 6 years old and my mom had started to change careers from being a nurse to being a draftsperson for designing kitchens and baths. And I was asking her what she was doing, and she was saying, "Oh, I'm designing a kitchen." And I said, "Oh, well, who designs houses?" And she says, "Well, architects or people design houses." And something clicked in me where I had never thought about where all these buildings came from that were sitting around in the environment. But as a 6-year-old, when I found out that human beings designed the environment that we were living in, that's what I knew I wanted to do. I wanted to have some impact on creating more beautiful buildings and places around the world or around my community. And growing up on Maui, especially in the 1970s and 1980s, on the North Shore of Maui was incredibly beautiful. We were really close to the shore. It was not a very long walk to get there. And I had friends in the neighborhood, and we would explore all of the beaches and all of the forests and things that were all along the North Shore. And all of that beauty, all of the natural world that Hawaii has to offer, because my dad would take us hiking all the time. All of those things really coalesced in me. I draw on my childhood experience of Maui all the time. And I didn't leave Maui until I left for college. So it was a long time there, 14 years there, and I go back every year. My parents are still there. I still have friends and family. So I still utilize the beauty of Hawaii in a lot of the work that I do.
I see. Do you take any inspiration from anything here in Arizona as
Oh,
well?
yes, lots. I fell in love. It's interesting, too, because even before I was 6, my mom's parents were retired in Green Valley, Arizona, south of Tucson. And I remember when I was about 5, we went to visit them, and I had never seen the desert before, any desert, and I was just enamored with it right away. I was super interested in the geology. I'd never seen anything like quartz, stone, and I just fell in love with all of it. And so when I ended up coming back to Arizona, I have always appreciated the landscape. I still love the geology. I get a lot of inspiration from the way that when you hike through, let's say, Hidden Valley on South Mountain, and you're kind of in a canyon, walking downhill, and you see these rock formations that are at a particular angle, and it's so dynamic. And the way that the rocks are shaped, the way that they point to something and how they're held up, all of those things I find extremely interesting. They're very tectonic. They're very architectural in a sense. So I draw a lot of my inspiration from all kinds of aspects and different landscapes in Arizona, but mostly right around the Phoenix area. And Maria and I have started paddleboarding a few years ago, and looking at the geology of the canyons and things that you can paddle through to the east of here it's very inspiring.
I see. I wanted to go back to coLAB Studio. How would you describe it for someone who doesn't know much about it? What words would you use to describe coLAB Studio?
Generally, we describe it as 2 laboratories, one for art, one for architecture, and that we are both artists and architects. Maria has, like I said, a master's in fine art and sculpture. I have a minor in fine art in painting, figure painting, and we both graduated from architectural schools as well. So we like to blend and blur some of those aspects in all of our projects. We don't really think 100% like an artist or 100% like an architect, which makes us, I guess, a little bit more unique than most architects around, although there are very artful architects all over the valley. Lots of very good people that are excellent at designing. We spend a lot more time, I think, on our art side than I guess a typical architect would.
I see. How much of a role would you say your educational backgrounds played in coLAB Studio and what you do here? How much of a role?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the education that you get, it informs a lot of what you do. I think for Maria and I was in college for 10 years, including a kind of gap year before grad school. And when Maria and I met and we decided we were going to go to school in London together, and we went out there, her school, the Slade School of Fine Art in the University College of London, was a 10-minute walk from my school, and we each lived by our school. So I would spend a lot of time with the artists in her school after 6 p.m., let's say. I would stop working, walk up to the UCL. There was a bar in the school that the artists would all congregate in. And so I would be a part of that conversation. We're still really close friends with a lot of those people that Maria went to school with. And so we were getting all of these really interesting conversations regarding the art world and art thinking and understanding that. And then when Maria would come to the Architectural Association of London, the conversations would be much more about architectural concepts and different aspects of processes of creating architecture. And in the teacher that I had in both years at the Architectural Association was Gert Stockmann from a group called Formalhaut from Germany. And he also practices art and architecture with his partners. Really one partner in the last 20 years, but originally there were 3 of them. And so learning from him along those 2 years, and Maria was often there. Maria became very close with Gertz too. He really was a tremendous mentor to us about how to, work with blending both of those things together, and really colliding the different ideologies or philosophies or processes of art and architecture, and how to actually make a singular kind of practice out of that. We both were hugely influenced by Jones Studio as well, and Eddie Jones and Neil, but that mentorship that we got was really, I think, very important for us to understand that we could have a practice that did both, and to actually think in both sort of realms. So that education that we got in those 2 years in London were tremendously formative for us.
I see. You talked about your mentor. Are there any other individuals that influence the work you do here at coLAB Studio, whether it be maybe family members, any colleagues, any friends?
Oh, everything kind of affects us in one way or another. I was in Washington State University before I came to Arizona State. And when I was at Washington State University, I was very young. I was 17, my first year of college. And I wasn't ready for college, so I didn't study as hard as I should have. And after the first 2 years, you apply to get into the upper division of an architecture school. I was number 48 out of 45. And so that triggered me to go into art, because there was a part of me that was more aligned with art at the time. So I went into art, and I did really, really well for 2 years there. And yet I knew that it was going to be difficult to have a profession in art. And so I transferred down to Arizona State University, had to start over, go through the first and second year studios in architecture. But I sure as heck wasn't going to make the same bad decisions. And so I worked really, really hard, was able to get into the upper division, did really well in the school while I was there. And that was a really formative moment in my life when, I realized that I had screwed up and hadn't taken things seriously enough, and B, that there was a place like ASU that was able to, that was willing to take me in and actually, rehabilitate my path towards a career. And so both of those things are I felt really fortunate about, and I never take anything for granted now. I work super, super hard on everything that I do because I know what hard work really brings, the positives that it really brings to your life in general. So all of those things are really formative again for me.
I've noticed that coLAB Studios has collaborated with different municipalities here in Arizona. How is that experience like working with different municipalities on projects or art or whatever you guys work on?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and fun to see the way that the various different municipalities, just even in the Phoenix metropolitan area, they each have a different culture. The two that I'm most familiar with are Phoenix and Tempe, and they're very, very different cultures to me. They're both excellent in their own way. They just have different agendas. And we've worked with Chandler, I think 3 or 4 times now, and we did a project in Surprise. We did project in Gilbert. We've done various different projects around, and I really like to see the way that they operate, just because they, like I said, they really are distinct, and the culture of each is palpable. And so we try to really work with that culture to try to get people to buy into the ideas that we have through their culture. So we identify their culture and our culture in some way to make something work. And I assume that, pretty much all artists and architects in town do the same thing. So I don't know how unique it is, especially here, because it's a big market, but also a confined market. We don't have big cities right next to us, like in the East Coast, let's say. So everybody gets to know, I think, a lot of the players in town.
I see. You talked about culture, and I'm kind of curious. How would you describe the culture of Phoenix and Tempe specifically?
Well, Phoenix is a huge monster, you know what I mean? They have the most population, they have the biggest government. And so when somebody wants to come in and try to make a difference in Phoenix, in their community, it can be a little bit of a longer road than in Tempe, because Tempe is so small. We're one of the smaller cities in the metro area. But it's so small, and so many of the employees that work at the city of Tempe actually live in Tempe, so they have a vested interest in improving things. And if somebody comes to them and says, hey, I'd like to talk about improving this or improving that, a lot of times Tempe will really listen. And actually, even if it's just one person, if they have a good idea, they'll listen to it. And in Phoenix, I found it's a little bit more like an immovable object at times. Very good people working there, excellent. The people on the political side are excellent. I love Kate Gallego. They have a lot of competence in how they run the city, but the culture is such that it's so much bigger. It's harder to actually make an impact as an individual or as a community as it is in Tempe, in my opinion. People in Phoenix might disagree. And there are definitely people I know that are in the community that make a really big difference, like the people of the Roosevelt Row CDC. Those guys like Greg Esser and Cindy Dash, and the real leaders that there's Jim McPherson. I mean, there's a bunch of people that are going through my head right now. They've all made a really big impact. Dorina Bustamante is another person that comes to mind. There's a bunch. But they also have to act as a group often to get something interesting done.
And when you work with these municipalities, are they the ones that reach out to you guys?
Oh, it depends. I mean, in terms of projects, you mean?
Yes.
For both architecture and art projects, there's generally a process where they say, hey, we have a call for artists, or we want to have a proposal from an architecture office to propose something for this particular project. And so there's an application process, and then if you get shortlisted, you start meeting the people that are involved with the project, and then you get an interview. When you're interviewing against other firms, and if you get the project, then that's when you're working on it, and that's when you really get to know people. So that's how that happens. It's almost never does an architect or an artist come to the city and say, I've got this idea and I'd like to do it. Generally, there's a very specific process for something to happen. Because you don't want a city to say, oh, we're just giving this artist something without any kind of competition, or an architect without any competition. You want to make sure you're getting the best people.
I see. One of the things you've been working on with one municipality, the city of Tempe, is the ADOT bridge. Is that correct? You've been working on a project related to the ADOT bridge. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that and describe what that is?
Well, the bigger project. Well, let me take a step back. One of the things that you're getting at is where the budgets for art projects come from, and art projects are generally whenever there's a capital project being done by a municipality, or in this case a state agency like ADOT, there is a bit of money for a public art project in association with a larger project. So there's a bigger budget that's going on, and municipalities will often do a 1% for the arts governmental process. So when they're, let's say, if they're putting a road or a bridge over Camelback Road in Phoenix, 1% of the entire construction cost will go towards the public art process, which includes the management of it from the city side, and the cost of the artwork and the artist fee, those types of things, and the maintenance should be, and at least maintenance for the public art. So with the ADOT project, it's a little bit different, because ADOT decided that they were going to expand the Broadway curve, what's known as the Broadway curve, which comes from South Phoenix and has a big wide curve as it comes through Tempe. And it's always been an area where there's a kind of a major slowdown, because you have the US 60 joining the 10, and then there's the curve, and so traffic is trying to get into whatever lanes they need. And it was slowing things down so much that they decided they were going to put this big capital project to it. Because it was in Tempe, in this case in Tempe, but it doesn't matter which municipality they go to, they have to negotiate with that city to say, okay, this is what we're planning to do. This is how much we're planning to widen the freeway. And these are all the things that we're going to do for the freeway. And the city has to give them the okay. And so there was a little bit of bartering that goes back and forth. And one thing that Tempe really wanted to see, if the freeway were going in, was a way to connect the east and west sides of the freeway there, because it's almost impossible for anybody on a bike or a pedestrian, and even via car, to get across the freeway for quite a long time, for like a mile. So what their ask of ADOT was, let's put 2 pedestrian bridges a mile apart over the I-10 that will then connect these areas of the city, which is really critical, because there are a couple of bike paths that cut all the way through east-west over the city, and there was no bike path over the freeway. You'd have to go really out of your way to get there. So now there'll be those 2 connections that really help. So once that was in there, the city of Tempe elected to put a budget attached to those pedestrian bridges for art. And so I met with Maria and I went and applied for the job. We interviewed, we won the job. And then we started working with the city of Tempe and ADOT to figure out what to put on it. And our thought about the public art in that location is that you've got 2 different, very, very different scales of speed. You've got people going 80 miles an hour underneath the bridges in cars that are only going to have a second to register something as art as you're driving underneath. And then you have the people that are walking or biking along the bridges, which is a much slower mode, and especially with walking, that you could actually appreciate a different scale of the artwork from within the bridges. So the trick was, okay, well, how do we create something that is instantly interesting as art, and then something that has more lasting effect to people that are slowly moving through the bridges? And what we immediately, actually, is interesting. That project was maybe the quickest conceptual, from nothing to knowing exactly what to do. It was like the quickest part of or quickest process I've ever done with any project. But the idea was that the bridges themselves are kind of like fruit, and I love the prickly pear cactus that we have and the purple fruit on them, and that not everybody takes advantage of those fruit. They're a little bit hard to get into. You can't just pick them and eat them. But the cactus and the fruit, I find super fascinating, that you can eat actually both the petals when they're really young, the nopal, and the apuncha fruit is super edible and really healthy. So I was starting to equate the bridges over the I-10 with the fruit. So the freeway is sort of like the prickly pear, and the bridge is sort of like the fruit, but the fruit is on top of the bridge. And so the shape, the forms, they are all, a little chaotic and unusual, and it's really unusual to see anything on top of the bridges around town. And that creates a skyline effect that you can immediately recognize from the car, that's something that doesn't belong there, in a sense, like it's something out of place, something that's unique. And that's what we really wanted, was something that would create a unique experience in the city. And then from the bottom, there are these beautiful graphics that Maria drew that are at the bottom of the fruit. And all of the fruit are set to a different solar angle throughout the year. So the sun will come through just on basically the right day or the right week, and shine sunlight through the cone, the fruit. And on the bottom, it'll project a little bit of light down to the bridge, inside the bridge, of the pattern that Maria cut out of the bottom of the fruit. So that there's something, that's the thing inside the bridge that you can identify with. And yeah, that, I think that balance is there. So that was really a fun opportunity, that there's hundreds of thousands of people that drive underneath those bridges every day. So that will be pretty neat to have as a public art project, and have it there for a long time, hopefully.
That's really a really creative aspect of the art project. And what's the status right now of that art project with the bridge? Is it currently a work in progress, or
Yes.
What's the status?
It is a work in progress. We started in 2019, I think in summer of 2019, and it's just a long slog with the freeway construction that's been going on a long time. I mean, there were 2 years of planning, maybe 3 years of planning, before they even started the work at the freeway. So the sculptures are all manufactured. They're in the process of getting a coating for the color, but also to protect the metal that makes up the art. So that's happening now, and the installation I can't really speak to. I thought it was going to be installed last summer, and then I thought it was going to be installed this summer, and it's still not installed yet, and we're not in control of that schedule. So we're just kind of beholden to their schedule.
Got it. Other than the work you do for municipalities, you also do other work. I think you guys also have studio art. Can you describe some of the other things you do here at coLAB Studio that I think that would be important to know?
Yeah, well, there's a project that Maria and I have been working on for years, where really it's Maria's project that I kind of am trying to tag along with. But she decided that she wanted to start making really large drawings of mountains. And so she started driving all over Arizona, drive out to someplace early in the morning, and have a really big pad and a pen or pencil, and draw what she sees of a mountain. And then she started doing that, but looking at long mountains and doing really long drawings of mountains. So she's created and actually displayed a couple of those drawings in the past. One of them is 30 feet long. And what that is portraying are, she spent more than a year, I think it was about a year and a half, driving between Phoenix and Tucson and looking for all of the best mountains, on the way that are not necessarily on the freeway. Like Picacho Peak is one of them, that's right on the freeway, but others are pretty far off. But whatever the closest mountains were, all the way down from Phoenix to Tucson, she drew them and then made them look like one continuous mountain. It was a 30-foot drawing. It was really, really beautiful. And I started thinking about this idea of efficiency in the world and the way that ever since the Industrial Revolution, and really before then, but it really picked up with the Industrial Revolution, there was this push towards efficiency where everything got faster, and we don't really pay attention to what is going on around us now. We've gotten so efficient about production and about making money or whatever, that we're not really paying attention to all the life that is around us, let's say. And so I loved Maria's drawings of the mountains because it was a way of thinking about the I-10 that was not about efficiency, where it was designed as efficient as possible, but it wasn't beautiful. It's not a very beautiful drive in a lot of the parts of it. And so I started redesigning the I-10 to go to all the mountains that Maria was showing. That would be an inefficient way to get between Phoenix and Tucson, but would be really beautiful, where you would be driving towards these peaks, get close to them, and then drive towards another peak, get close to them, and the whole drive would be a completely different experience. And that aspect, the concept of that is to negate the idea of constant efficiency, that we just need to get from here to there as quickly as possible without enjoying the ride along the way. So we're working on an exhibit where we would have both of the pieces. We'd have all of her mountain drawings and then a large map of Arizona that shows the existing freeway removed, and then showing the new freeway that was super inefficient. And there's environmental things and cultural things that are, kind of in the way of making the freeway a different path, but it's not reality, it's art. And the concept is more about appreciating those other aspects, not the efficiency.
Got it. And what's it been like working with Maria?
Oh, horrible. I'm just kidding. It's been great. We're best friends. We've been married for 20 years and together for almost 30. And we get along really, really well. We certainly have had our arguments about artwork, particularly in the beginning, where we had to hash out, some major, idealized idea about our practice or about our work or about our process or whatnot. But when you push through that kind of barrier at some point, it just becomes a lot easier. And now working with Maria is amazing. She's one of the most creative people I've ever known. And she's incredibly smart, incredibly energetic. She's got so much energy. She can work for days straight and then collapse for a day. But she's capable of just an amazing amount of thought and love and working. She's a very sweet person. She loves everybody. She wants everybody to be happy all the time and have a good time. And so yeah, she's really easy to work with. I think I've got to be more difficult to work with than she is. So, definitely on some levels.
Interesting. I think we're just about done, but if there's anything else you would like to share about yourself or about coLAB Studio that you think would be important for our audience to know, please feel free to say so right now.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I have, that I started studying a few years ago is biophilic design, for instance, and to take this a little bit full circle back to my origins. when I was on Maui and hiking around in all of these different environments. In Hawaii, everybody thinks of it as just a tropical forest kind of place or a beach, but there's tons and tons of variety of climate and biomes within the islands, because there are mountains up to 14,000 feet, and there are rainforests, and there are pine forests, and there are deserty areas as well. Anyway, this all comes back to me now, when I'm working here and identifying the most important aspects of any biome, any experience that you have in nature, and trying to absorb that into the work. And Maria is very much, this is how we changed over the years to be a lot more attuned to the natural world that way, and putting that together in our work, whether it's architecture or art. So the biophilic design is something that a wonderful friend of mine, Sonia Bokart, brought to my attention and helped kind of mentor me in the practice of that study. And I absolutely love it. And everything I think I do now is based around that. And I think Maria's kind of come to that same thing. There's all different kinds of things that make us well-rounded designers and hopefully people, like the study of biophilic design, but also regenerative development, which isn't making a site or a building provide as much to its land as it takes. It's a completely different kind of mindset about problem solving and communication and all of these different aspects that is a big part of how we practice. There's a lot of different aspects to the things that Maria and I do, and I don't know how else. I don't know where to go from there. So I guess that's about it.
Well, thank you for sharing. And if people wanted to know more about you or wanted to check out coLAB Studio, how can they go about connecting? Do you have a website? Do you have any social media? How can they reach out to coLAB Studio?
There is a website, which is coLABstudio.com, and we are on Instagram. It's coLAB_studio_LLC, and there's phone, the internet, and email. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, you can get me at matt@coLABstudio.com or maria@coLABstudio.com. I look forward to talking to anybody that wants to talk about anything that they saw today.
All right, sounds good. I think that wraps up our interview with Ventura Valley. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.